The art gallery on Fifth Street had always been Marcus's refuge. At 65, he had learned that life moved at a different pace when you stepped through those tall glass doors. The outside world, with its noise, its expectations, its relentless forward march, seemed to pause here. Everything slowed down. Everything became about observation, contemplation, and the delicate dance between color and form. Marcus had owned the gallery for 37 years. He'd built it from nothing, from a converted warehouse space and a dream that seemed almost laughable to his family at the time. His parents had wanted him to become a lawyer or an accountant, something respectable and profitable. Instead, he'd chosen art. He'd chosen beauty. He'd chosen a life that belonged entirely to him. It had been a good life, not without its pain. There had been heartbreak, illness, the slow erosion of friendships lost to time and circumstance. But standing in his gallery on that particular Tuesday afternoon, surrounded by the work of emerging artists and the soft hum of the climate control system, Marcus felt the contentment of a man who had made the right choices. He was arranging a new exhibition when the bell above the door chimed. It was a gentle sound, one he barely registered anymore, so familiar was it to the rhythm of his days. But something in it arrested his attention. Perhaps it was the way the light was hitting the windows at that exact moment, or perhaps, though he wouldn't have believed in such things, it was something that transcended the ordinary. The young man who walked through the door seemed to fill the entire space with an indefinable energy. He was tall, with the kind of unself-conscious grace that comes from genuine youth, not the performed grace of someone trying to appear young. He had warm brown skin, dark eyes that seemed perpetually surprised by what they were seeing, and he wore his intelligence like an open book. Marcus guessed him to be in his mid-20s, though the young man's face held a kind of boyishness that made age difficult to calculate. He was wearing paint-stained overalls over a faded vintage t-shirt, and his hair was twisted into locks that fell past his shoulders. There was paint on his hands, real paint, not affectation. This was someone who actually created. The young man moved through the gallery with the reverence of someone entering a cathedral. He didn't rush from piece to piece. Instead, he stood before each work with genuine attention, his eyes moving across surfaces and his head tilting as though listening to something only he could hear. Marcus found himself watching instead of working. This wasn't unusual. He often observed the way people moved through his space, reading their emotional reactions to the art. It was part of what kept the gallery alive for him, this study of human connection with beauty. But there was something different about this young man's presence. After nearly 20 minutes of stillness before a particularly challenging abstract piece, something with violent slashes of red and midnight blue, the young man finally turned and caught Marcus watching him. Instead of looking away, instead of that moment of embarrassment that typically followed, the young man smiled. It transformed his entire face, lighting it from within like someone had turned on a lamp behind his eyes. "This one," he said, gesturing at the painting, "this one is angry and grieving and defiant all at once. I can't stop looking at it." Marcus found his breath had caught somewhere in his chest. "Yes," he said simply, "that's exactly what it is." The young man approached, extending a paint-covered hand. "I'm Jamal. I'm an artist. Well, I'm trying to be. I'm also a barista and Uber driver and currently homeless, but I like to lead with the artist part." There was no bitterness in his honesty, only a kind of weary humor. Marcus shook his hand, noticing how the warmth of it seemed to travel up his arm. "Marcus, I own this place, and I think you're not trying to be an artist, you clearly are one." "How can you tell?" "Because you looked at that painting the way someone looks at their own reflection. You recognized yourself in it." Jamal's smile faltered for just a moment and something vulnerable crossed his face before he rebuilt his easy humor. "Well, that's either very insightful or very depressing, so thanks for that." Marcus found himself wanting to make this young man stay. "Are you working on anything now, something I could see?" What followed was one of the most natural conversations Marcus had had in years. Jamal spoke about his work, large canvases that explored the intersection of identity, race, and queerness. He spoke about his inspirations and his fears, about moving to the city 3 months ago with nothing but a backpack and a reckless belief that he could make it as an artist. He spoke about nights slept in his car, about applying for residencies that rejected him, about art school applications that had gone nowhere because he'd run out of money. And Marcus listened. He asked questions. He saw in Jamal the version of himself from 40 years ago, before success, before the gallery, before he'd built the walls that kept people at a manageable distance. By the time Jamal left an hour later, Marcus had offered to give him an artist statement template, mentioned an upcoming residency program that had just expanded its applications, and, surprising himself, invited him to return with photos of his work. It was only after Jamal had left that Marcus realized he'd given him the wrong phone number. Not intentionally, it was an honest mistake, a transposition of 2 digits. But standing there with his heart still beating faster than normal, he wondered if some part of him had orchestrated this small error, whether he was afraid of what might happen if someone like Jamal actually did call. That night, Marcus did something he hadn't done in a long time. He looked at himself in the mirror with honest eyes. He saw the lines around his mouth, the silver in his hair, the way age had redistributed his weight and changed the landscape of his face. He saw a man who was successful and accomplished and terribly, achingly alone. And he felt something shift. Jamal sat in his car, a 2007 Honda Civic that ran on prayers and spite, and stared at the phone number Marcus had written down. He'd written it on the back of a card with the gallery's information, his handwriting neat and measured. Jamal turned it over and over in his hands, not dialing. He'd learned not to get his hopes up. The art world was full of older men who were mentors and patrons, who offered opportunities and connections with strings attached that you only discovered when it was too late to say no. Jamal had been to a few gallery openings where the power dynamics made his skin crawl, where he'd watched talented young artists accept compliments and invitations with a kind of grim resignation. But Marcus hadn't felt like that. There had been something genuinely interested in his face, but not hungry, not predatory. Still, Jamal knew the risk of misreading situations, of allowing loneliness to create intimacy where none existed. He'd moved to the city to escape a small town where he'd felt suffocated by expectations and invisible in his queerness. His family had accepted him, coming out with the resignation of people who'd already known but hoped it might pass. His mother had asked him, with genuine concern, if he was sure he wasn't going through a phase. His father had simply stopped making eye contact. The art scene had felt like a promised land, but the reality had been harsh. Gallery owners wanted established artists, residencies wanted people with credentials, and the few spaces that were open to emerging artists wanted work that was commercially viable, that wouldn't challenge buyers or make anyone uncomfortable. Jamal's work was deliberately uncomfortable. His recent series featured photographs of black queer bodies in spaces of historical violence, abandoned churches, segregated lunch counter sites, corners where hate crimes had occurred. He painted over the photographs with slashing brushstrokes in colors that didn't match reality but matched emotional truth. He wanted his work to demand something from viewers. He wanted it to insist on being seen and felt. It wasn't commercial, it wasn't safe. And the fact that Marcus had understood that, had seen that about him in just an hour of looking at his work, meant something. 3 days later, Jamal was parked outside a public Wi-Fi location, his laptop balanced on his steering wheel, looking at Marcus's gallery website. The biography section showed a photograph Marcus from about 5 years ago. Jamal guessed. He was handsome in a way that spoke of class and education and the kind of life Jamal had never inhabited. Silver hair, tailored shirt. The kind of smile that suggested he was the type of person used to being listened to. The biography was impressive. Multiple awards, international exhibitions, a reputation as someone who'd championed minority artists when that was less fashionable than it was now. There was a mention of his ex-partner, a dance choreographer who'd passed away in 1998. It was listed matter-of-factly, but Jamal sensed the depth of that wound even from a distance. He found himself imagining what kind of man you had to be to survive that, to build something beautiful afterward, to continue believing in art and people. On impulse, he drafted an email with photos attached, his best work, the series he was most proud of. He wrote a message that was carefully casual, that didn't reveal how much he'd thought about Marcus or the gallery over the past 3 days. He read it 3 times before hitting send, his heart hammering like he'd just done something dangerous. The response came within 2 hours. "These are extraordinary. I want to see them in person. Can you bring them by the gallery next Saturday? I'm closed, but I'll be there around 2 p.m. We should talk about a possible exhibition." Jamal read the message 7 times. He didn't believe it. Then he did. Then he cycled back to disbelief. An exhibition meant visibility. It meant legitimacy. It meant his work would be hanging where people would see it, where critics might notice, where things could change. It also meant spending more time with Marcus, which was the thought that terrified him most. Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect weather that felt like a sign if you believed in signs. Jamal had spent the morning washing his car, changing his clothes 3 times, and debating whether to bring flowers until he decided that was absolutely insane and also impossible given his financial situation. He settled on showing up clean with his work and trying not to say anything stupid. Marcus was waiting for him outside the gallery. He was wearing linen pants and a deep blue linen shirt that made his eyes appear almost gray. He looked different in daylight, less like a photograph and more like a real person with texture and depth. He looked nervous, which surprised Jamal. Surely men like Marcus didn't get nervous about meetings with artists. "You came," Marcus said, and there was something in his voice that suggested he genuinely wasn't sure Jamal would. "You invited me. I wasn't sure you'd gotten the message. I gave you the wrong number." "Oh," Jamal said, "I assumed I'd written it down wrong." They stood looking at each other for a moment that stretched longer than necessary. Marcus seemed to realize this and unlocked the gallery door with a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Come on, let's look at your work." The gallery was different when it was empty. Without the other art, without the ambient noise of visitors, it felt like a private space, almost intimate. Jamal had brought 5 large canvases, his best pieces from the series, along with the photographs underneath that showed his process. He hung them carefully, and then he stepped back and let Marcus look. What Jamal had learned about himself was that he could handle criticism. He could weather rejection. What he couldn't handle was real attention. When someone actually looked at his work, not the decorative elements or the technical skill but the intention beneath it, he felt exposed in a way that was almost unbearable. Marcus moved from piece to piece slowly, sometimes reaching out as if to touch but never quite allowing himself to. His face was completely open and Jamal could track his emotional journey across the paintings. He saw the moment Marcus understood what the work was about. He saw the moment it moved him. When Marcus finally turned around, there were tears on his face. "Fuck," Marcus said, which seemed to surprise him. He laughed and wiped his eyes. "Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm not usually so." "It's okay," Jamal said quietly. "You're supposed to feel something, that's the whole point." "I feel like I'm looking at the work of someone I've been waiting to meet my entire life," Marcus said. "And I'm an old man, so I've waited a long time." The statement hung between them. Jamal didn't know how to respond to that kind of honesty from someone he barely knew. "I want to give you an exhibition," Marcus continued. "A solo show. We'd need to plan it, probably schedule it for 8 months from now, which would give us time to get the word out, build some buzz. I have connections at a few journals, critics I can reach out to. We could make something real happen here, Jamal." "Why?" Jamal asked. "Why would you do this for someone you just met?" Marcus considered the question. "Because your work matters, because the world needs to see it, and because," he paused, seeming to measure his words carefully, "because when you walked into my gallery last Tuesday, something in me woke up, and I'm old enough to recognize that as significant. I'm old enough not to ignore it." It could have been a line. Jamal had heard enough of them to recognize the shape of seduction, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like Marcus was trying to be honest, even if honesty was complicated. "I'll take the exhibition," Jamal said carefully, "but I need to understand what this is, what you want." Marcus smiled sadly. "The truth? I don't know yet. I'm 65 years old, Jamal. I've had my adventures, I've had my heartbreak. I've built a life that means something to me. And then you walked into my gallery and I realized how much space there was in that life, how much I'd gotten used to filling it with work instead of people." "I'm not a person, I'm a disaster," Jamal said. "I'm homeless, I'm broke, I'm barely getting by." "I know, and you're also brilliant, you're also kind, you're also someone I want to know better, but I understand that's a big ask given the context. So let's start with the exhibition. Let's start with me being your mentor and your champion, and if something else develops from that, we'll figure it out, but there's no pressure, no strings, I promise you that." Over the next several months, they did exactly what Marcus suggested. During the day, Jamal worked his odd jobs and continued creating art. On most evenings, he came to the gallery. Sometimes he came to work. Marcus had given him a key, a small gesture that made Jamal feel legitimate in ways he couldn't articulate. Sometimes he came just to be near Marcus. They developed a routine. Jamal would arrive around 7 p.m. after his last rideshare shift. Marcus would have dinner waiting, nothing fancy, usually something simple that he made himself. They'd eat together and then they'd talk. Marcus talked about his life before the gallery, about growing up in a conservative family and feeling like he was dying slowly from the weight of their expectations. He talked about coming out at 25, the liberation and the terror of it. He talked about his ex-partner, David, and the early years of their relationship when everything had felt possible. He died of pneumonia, Marcus said one evening months into their friendship. This was in '98 before good antiretroviral drugs. One day he was fine and 2 weeks later, Marcus trailed off looking out the window at the street below. I don't think I ever fully recovered. I built this gallery partly to honor him. He loved art, he wanted me to build this. And when he died it felt important to finish it, like I could make something beautiful from the devastation. Do you still love him? Jamal asked. Yes, Marcus said without hesitation, but I'm also still alive, and I've learned that those two things don't have to contradict each other. Jamal shared his own story too, his small hometown and the way invisibility had been worse than rejection. His complicated relationship with his parents who tried but couldn't quite bridge the gap. His series of artistic influences and inspirations. His fear that he wasn't good enough, that his work was too angry, too political, too unapologetically black and queer. You are good enough, Marcus said with absolute certainty. You're better than good enough. You're biased, Jamal replied. Extremely, but I'm also right. As months passed, something shifted in the space between them. It wasn't dramatic. It was the gradual blurring of boundaries, the way they found themselves sitting closer on the couch while they talked, the way their conversations became more intimate, more revealing. It was the moment when Jamal realized he was looking forward to seeing Marcus more than he was looking forward to creating art, which both thrilled and terrified him. There was a particular night about 4 months into their friendship when everything crystallized. Jamal had just finished a new piece. A large canvas that felt like it contained all the loneliness and searching of the last year. He'd hung it in the back studio of the gallery and he'd been afraid to show it to anyone, even Marcus. But Marcus found it. He was there at midnight. He sometimes came to the gallery at odd hours, unable to sleep, and he saw the painting. It was abstract but not quite, featuring a figure that could have been male or female, real or imagined, reaching towards something just outside the frame. The figure was rendered in shades of gold and amber, warm and human. Behind it, the world was rendered in cold blues and grays, empty and vast. Marcus stood in front of it for a very long time. This is about me, isn't it? He finally said. Jamal, caught, couldn't deny it. Not about you specifically, about the idea of connection, about reaching for something you're not sure exists. And does it exist? Marcus asked, turning to face him, this thing you're reaching for. I don't know, Jamal said, and his voice was barely above a whisper. I think maybe it's starting to. Marcus crossed the small distance between them. This close, Jamal could see the small scar above his left eyebrow, could smell the particular combination of cologne and soap that had become deeply familiar. This close, there was no room for uncertainty or misreading. I'm going to kiss you now, Marcus said, and if you don't want me to, you need to tell me in the next 3 seconds. Jamal didn't speak. Marcus kissed him with the tenderness of someone who'd been waiting a very long time, with the carefulness of someone aware of the power differential between them, with the passion of someone who recognized that waiting any more would be foolish. The morning after they kissed, Jamal woke in Marcus's apartment for the first time. The bed was soft, nicer than any bed he'd slept in during his time in the city, and the apartment was exactly as he'd expected, tasteful, organized, full of carefully chosen art pieces. There was a kind of perfectionism to it that spoke of someone who'd built a life where chaos wasn't invited. Marcus was already awake, standing on the balcony with a cup of coffee, looking out over the city. The sun was beginning to rise, painting everything in shades of pink and gold. Good morning, Marcus said when Jamal joined him. There was a note of uncertainty in his voice, as if he wasn't quite sure how they would be with each other in daylight. Hi, Jamal said, and then, thank you for the coffee, I didn't see any. It's on the kitchen counter, there's also milk, sugar, everything you need. They stood together in comfortable silence. Jamal was trying to sort through the complexity of his feelings. Fear, certainly fear of getting hurt, of this being some kind of fantasy that would evaporate in the real world, but also a sense of lightness, of possibility. For the first time since moving to the city, Jamal felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. I want to be honest about something, Marcus said quietly. This is new for me. I haven't been with anyone since David, and that was a long time ago. I'm not going to be perfect at it. I'm sleeping in my car until a few months ago, Jamal pointed out. I think we can both agree the bar isn't that high. Marcus laughed, and the sound seemed to ease something in both of them. Fair point, but I want you to know that I'm serious about this. I'm serious about you. I understand that there are complications, the age difference, the power dynamic with the gallery, the fact that I'm older and more established, and that creates an imbalance. But I want to try anyway, if you want to. I want to, Jamal said, and then because he needed to be honest too, but I'm scared. Of what? That I'm a project to you? That you're a knight in shining armor in my story, saving me from homelessness and failure. That eventually you'll figure out I'm not worth the effort and you'll move on to someone who's actually at your level. Marcus set down his coffee and turned to face Jamal fully. You're not a project, and I don't want to be your savior. That's not what this is. What this is, for me, is meeting someone who makes me feel alive again. Someone who reminds me that there's still beauty and possibility in the world. Someone I want to build something with, not fix or save. How can you be sure, Jamal pressed? You only just met me. You're right, I can't be completely sure, but I can tell you that in 40 years of looking at art, I've learned to recognize what matters. And Jamal, you matter, your work matters, you matter to me. Over the following weeks, they fell into a new pattern. Jamal still did his odd jobs, but less frequently now that Marcus had insisted on helping with his immediate financial needs. Instead of spending his evenings working, he spent them in the gallery or Marcus's apartment, creating new work with a creative energy that had been absent before. The exhibition began to take shape. Marcus reached out to critics he knew, to other gallery owners, to collectors. The buzz around Jamal's work, which had been non-existent before, began to build. A piece in a design blog led to a mention in a more prestigious arts journal. A local news station did a feature on emerging Black queer artists, and Jamal was included. Things were moving, momentum was building. But the relationship between them was becoming complicated in ways that extended beyond the professional. The power dynamic was real, and Jamal felt it acutely. When they disagreed about something, how a painting should be positioned, what the artist's statement should say, Jamal found himself deferring to Marcus, not because he believed Marcus was right, but because he didn't want to upset him. He didn't want to risk this good thing, this new life that felt so fragile. One evening, about 3 months after they'd first kissed, this dynamic reached a breaking point. Marcus had suggested adjusting one of Jamal's pieces, moving it to a different wall, and Jamal disagreed. The original placement was better, he felt it in his bones, but he'd almost agreed just to avoid conflict. No, he said instead, surprising himself, I don't want to move it. Why not? Marcus asked reasonably. The light on the east wall would better showcase the color palette. Because I like where it is, because my instinct says it belongs there. Because I'm the artist and I need to trust myself even when you, with all your experience and knowledge, think I'm wrong. Marcus looked at him with something like respect. Okay, we'll leave it where it is. That's it, you're not going to argue. No, because you're right, you're the artist, and I think I've been doing both of us a disservice by treating this like it's my vision. It's yours, I'm just the curator lucky enough to show it to the world. That conversation marked a shift. Jamal began asserting himself more, making decisions about his own work, his own life, and Marcus responded by stepping back slightly, by being more collaborative and less directive. It wasn't always easy, there were moments when old patterns tried to reassert themselves, but they were both trying. They also started having conversations about the age difference and what it meant. These were difficult conversations, the kind that required vulnerability and honesty. I worry that I'm taking advantage of you, Marcus said one night. That I'm using my resources and experience to keep you tethered to me in ways that aren't entirely healthy. You're not, Jamal said, but I need to know something. Is this real for you, or is this about me being young and beautiful and making you feel young again? It's real, but you're right to ask the question. Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. There's probably a small element of that, if I'm being honest. Being with you does make me feel younger, more alive, but that's not what this is about. This is about building a life with someone I love, that I want to be with, age aside. Love? Jamal asked quietly. Yes, I think I've been in love with you since the moment you walked into my gallery and stood in front of that painting. It took me a while to understand it, to accept it, but yes, I love you, Jamal. Jamal felt something unlock in his chest. I love you too, and I'm sorry for doubting it. Don't apologize, doubt is healthy, it's the way you protect yourself. As the date of the exhibition drew closer, the intensity of their relationship deepened. Jamal moved into Marcus's apartment, a decision that felt like a milestone, a commitment to building something permanent. He filled the space with his belongings, with the evidence of his life, and slowly the apartment became a shared space instead of Marcus's curated sanctuary. There were moments of friction as they learned each other's habits and preferences. Marcus was neat to the point of compulsiveness. Jamal was creative in his messiness, leaving art supplies scattered and paint-stained clothes draped over chairs. Marcus liked silence and order. Jamal needed music and controlled chaos. They had to learn to compromise to create a space that belonged to both of them. But underneath, the friction was an incredible tenderness. Jamal learned to anticipate Marcus's moods, to understand when the older man was slipping into the darker spaces of grief and memory. Marcus learned to give Jamal space when he needed to work, to understand the intensity of creative focus. One morning, about a week before the exhibition was set to open, Jamal woke to find Marcus making breakfast. Real breakfast, eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, coffee brewed to perfection. It was a weekend and they'd both slept late. "What's the occasion?" Jamal asked, wrapping his arms around Marcus from behind. "Do I need an occasion to make breakfast for someone I love?" "No, but you usually don't. So either you did something wrong and you're apologizing preemptively, or you have something to tell me." Marcus laughed and turned around. He had something in his pocket and Jamal watched as he pulled it out. It was a small box, red velvet, the kind that made Jamal's heart skip. "Not yet," Marcus said, reading his expression. "I'm not proposing, not right now anyway, but I wanted to give you this." Inside the box was a key, not a house key or an apartment key. Jamal already had those. This was different, more ornate, with a small tag attached. "For what?" Jamal asked. "For the gallery. I'm making you co-owner, not a business partner exactly. The legal structure is too complicated for that right now, but you're going to have a say in what we show, what we do. I'm tired of this being my vision alone. I want it to be ours." Jamal stared at the key, unable to quite process what was being offered. "Marcus, I can't." "You can, you will, that's not optional. This is too much, the exhibition letting me move in now this." "Listen to me," Marcus said, and there was a firmness in his voice that Jamal had learned meant he was serious. "I've spent the last 40 years building something that meant a lot to me, but what I've realized through knowing you is that the most important thing I can build isn't a gallery. It's a life with someone I love, and if that means sharing control and vision and ownership, then that's what it means. That's what I want." Jamal accepted the key, and with it he accepted the reality that his life had fundamentally changed. He was no longer homeless. He was no longer unknown. He was no longer alone, and he was terrified and grateful and awed by how quickly everything had transformed. The night of the opening was crisp and clear, the kind of evening that felt full of promise. The gallery had been transformed into a cathedral of Jamal's work. The paintings hung on white walls, lit by carefully placed spotlights that Marcus and Jamal had positioned together. Each piece was accompanied by an artist's statement that Jamal had written himself, with feedback from Marcus but entirely in his own voice. The opening was scheduled to begin at 7. By 6:30 there was already a line outside the gallery. Critics who'd been invited came. Other gallery owners came. A reporter from the city's arts publication arrived with a photographer. Word had spread faster than Jamal expected, the anticipation building through social media and word of mouth. Jamal was in the back studio trying not to hyperventilate. He'd changed clothes 4 times. He was wearing carefully selected pieces that felt authentically himself: black slacks, a deep burgundy shirt that matched one of the paintings, and shoes that were comfortable enough to stand in all evening. Marcus found him there, sitting on a stool, staring at nothing. "You okay?" Marcus asked. "No, I'm going to pass out or throw up or both. Is it possible to do both simultaneously?" Marcus sat down next to him and took his hand. "It's going to be incredible. Your work is incredible. People are going to see that tonight. What if they don't? What if everyone hates it and the gallery gets bad reviews and you regret taking a chance on me?" "I won't regret it, but if it makes you feel better, I genuinely believe that's not going to happen. I have faith in you and in your work." "Why?" "Because I've been in this world for decades. I know what resonates and what doesn't. I know when something is genuinely important and when it's just technically skilled. Your work is both. It's going to matter." They walked out to the front of the gallery together. Marcus went to greet people, to do the social work of being a gallerist. Jamal positioned himself near his work, trying to appear casual and available without being overbearing. What happened next was something Jamal would replay in his mind for years. Slowly at first and then with increasing energy, people moved through the gallery. They stood in front of the paintings, they read the artist's statements, and most importantly, they reacted. Not always with enthusiasm, some people moved through with polite indifference, but many of them responded with genuine emotion. He watched people get angry at his work, which was exactly what he wanted. He watched people cry. He watched people stand in front of a single piece for 10, 15, 20 minutes, clearly wrestling with what they were feeling. A woman with silver hair and impeccable taste pulled him aside. "I'm Dorothy Chen, I write for the Contemporary Arts Quarterly," she said. "Your work is extraordinary, I want to write a feature about you. This conversation, the way you're using abstraction and figuration together, the way you're centering queer black experience without making it legible to a straight white gaze, this is important work." Before Jamal could respond, a man approached from another direction. "I'm impressed," he said simply. "I'm a collector and I want to buy the third piece, how much?" They discussed a price that made Jamal's hands shake. He was going to make more money from one sale than he'd earned in the previous 6 months combined. The evening continued in this blur of conversation, emotion, and validation. Jamal met critics and collectors and other artists. He talked about his work, about the intentions behind it, about the series and what he was trying to explore. And people listened. Actually listened, treated what he had to say as though it mattered. Around 9 o'clock, Marcus appeared with his arm around Jamal's waist, a gesture that was both proprietary and deeply affectionate. "I wanted you to know we've sold 6 pieces. 6. 6, Jamal couldn't believe it, out of 11. And there are serious inquiries about 3 more, we might sell out." "That's not possible." "It's very possible, your work is good, Jamal, it was always going to be good." Toward the end of the evening, the crowd had thinned to just the diehards, the people who stayed until the very last moment because they couldn't bear to leave. Marcus brought champagne and glasses, and he and Jamal stood with a small group of friends and supporters, celebrating. That's when Dorothy Chen approached again. "Can I speak with you privately?" she asked Jamal. They stepped into the back studio, away from the noise. "I wanted to ask you something before I write my piece," Dorothy said. "And I need you to be completely honest with me. What's your relationship with Marcus?" Jamal felt his stomach drop. He'd been expecting this question, but not tonight, not now. "We're together," he said carefully. "We're in a relationship." "I thought so, and I want you to know that I'm going to write about your work as a piece. I'm not going to focus on the relationship. But I do want to know, are you comfortable with that narrative? Are you worried that people might diminish your work, might think you got this opportunity because of who you're sleeping with?" "Yes," Jamal admitted, "that's exactly what I'm worried about." Dorothy nodded as if this was the answer she'd expected. "I understand, but here's what I'm going to tell you, and I want you to listen carefully. Your work speaks for itself. I saw it before I knew who you were, before I knew anything about your relationship with Marcus. And I was moved by it. Many people in this gallery tonight were moved by it. The relationship might be how you met Marcus, but it's not why your work matters. Does that distinction make sense?" "I think so," Jamal said. "Good, because the art world is going to try to reduce your narrative. They're going to want a story, the older mentor, the younger protege, the romantic entanglement. But the real story is the one in these paintings. The real story is about a young black queer artist finding his voice and making work that demands to be seen. That's the narrative I'm interested in." After Dorothy left, Jamal found Marcus in the main gallery, carefully taking down one of the sold paintings. A collector would pick it up in the morning, and Marcus was wrapping it with the same care he would have used if it were his own work. "Dorothy wanted to know about us," Jamal said. Marcus paused in his wrapping. "And what did you tell her?" "The truth, that we're together." "Are you okay with that becoming part of the public narrative around your work?" Jamal considered this. "I don't know yet, ask me in a month." Marcus finished wrapping the painting and set it aside. Then he pulled Jamal close. "I love you. I want you to know that whatever happens, whether the art world embraces you or rejects you, whether the story of us becomes public or stays private, I love you, and I'm proud of you. Even if people think I slept my way into success. People will think what they want to think, but the people who matter, the people who actually look at your work and feel it, they'll know the truth. Your success isn't because of me, it's because you're talented and courageous and willing to make work that makes people uncomfortable. Those are the things that matter." The months that followed the exhibition were a whirlwind. Dorothy Chen's article came out in the Contemporary Arts Quarterly and was picked up by several online publications. Suddenly, Jamal's work was being discussed in circles he'd never imagined reaching. He was invited to speak at universities. A gallery in New York wanted to show his work. A collector who'd seen the exhibition bought 2 more pieces. And with the success came complications. His parents called, something they rarely did. His mother had seen an article about him online and wanted to talk. There was something tentative in her voice, as if she was approaching carefully. "We're proud of you," she said, and Jamal believed her. "Your work is beautiful, honey. We don't understand all of it, but we can see that it matters." "That means a lot," Jamal said. "There's something else," his mother continued. "We saw that you're in a relationship with an older man," the gallery owner. Jamal's heart rate spiked. This was the conversation he'd been dreading. "Yes, his name is Marcus. We've been together for about 6 months." "Is he good to you?" his mother asked. And there was such genuine concern in the question that Jamal felt tears prick his eyes. "Yes, he's very good to me." "Then I'm happy for you. Your father wants to talk to you too." His father's voice was gruff when he came on the line. "The guy in the pictures, he's old." "He's 65. "That's what I said, he's old, but your mother showed me his gallery and he seems like he's built something real, something that matters, so if he treats you right then—" His father paused, clearly struggling with the emotions. "Then I'm glad you have someone. I know we weren't always good at showing you that we support who you are, but we do. We're proud of you." After hanging up, Jamal sat in stunned silence. He'd prepared for rejection from his family, had built walls against it, but instead he'd received acceptance. It fundamentally shifted something inside him. That evening, he told Marcus about the conversation. Marcus listened carefully and then he pulled Jamal into his arms. "I'm glad they're coming around," Marcus said, "though I have to tell you I'm also terrified of meeting them." "Why?" "Because what if they think I'm taking advantage of you? What if they decide I'm the reason you're away from home, away from building a more normal life?" "Are you taking advantage of me?" Jamal asked. "No, but a parent's job is to worry, and I would probably worry too if I were your father." "Well, you're about to be, so get ready for the worrying." The weekend his parents came to visit was a study in managed anxiety. Marcus cleaned the apartment obsessively. Jamal tried on 6 different outfits. They planned the visit down to the minute, knowing exactly where they would eat and what they would show his parents. Jamal's mother was a small woman with kind eyes and gray threading through her dark hair. His father was taller, with a perpetually stern expression that Jamal had learned over the years masked genuine gentleness. They arrived on a Friday evening, and the first thing his mother did was look around the apartment and nod approvingly. "It's beautiful," she said, "and so full of art, I like it." His father shook Marcus's hand firmly. "Thanks for having us." Dinner was at a restaurant Marcus knew well, where the owner came out to greet them and Marcus was treated like an old friend. His parents seemed to relax seeing how Marcus was respected in the community, how he moved through the world with ease and confidence. Over dessert, his mother asked Marcus directly, "How did you two meet?" Marcus told the story honestly, leaving nothing out. How Jamal had walked into the gallery, how Marcus had been struck by his presence and his work, how he'd invited him back. He explained the professional mentorship that had grown into something more. "I understand that the age difference is significant," Marcus said. "I understand that it raises questions, but I want you to know that I've never pressured Jamal. I've never used my resources or position to coerce him into anything. What we have is real and it's based on mutual respect and genuine love." Jamal's father listened carefully, then nodded. "Fair enough, I appreciate you being straight with us." Later that night, after his parents had gone to their hotel, Jamal's mother asked to speak with him privately while Marcus was in the kitchen making tea. "I want to ask you something and I need you to tell me the truth," she said. "Okay. Are you happy?" Jamal thought about the past 6 months. He thought about his art being seen, about finally feeling like he had a place in the world. He thought about waking up next to Marcus, about the way Marcus looked at him like he was something precious and irreplaceable. He thought about the key to the gallery hanging by the door, about the future that felt open and full of possibility. "Yes," he said, "I'm really happy." His mother smiled and Jamal realized he'd never seen her look so relieved. "Good, that's all I wanted to know." A year after the exhibition, Marcus and Jamal held an opening for Jamal's second solo show. This time, there was no question of whether people would come or whether the work would matter. There was anticipation, real critical interest, a waiting list of collectors interested in purchasing pieces. The work had evolved. It was less angry now, less consumed with rage at injustice. Instead, it explored beauty and intimacy, the small ways that connection redeemed the world. There were paintings about Marcus, though not portraits, abstract celebrations of the feeling of being loved, of being seen, of building something real with another person. One painting in particular was Marcus's favorite. It showed two figures, rendered in gold and warm amber, their bodies intertwining in a way that was both erotic and tender. The background was a riot of color and texture, chaotic but beautiful, suggesting that life didn't have to be neat or orderly to be worth living. Dorothy Chen had titled her review The Art of Becoming, How Jamal Williams Found His Voice. In it, she discussed the evolution of his work, the way each series built on the last, the way he was developing into one of the most important young artists of his generation. She made no mention of Marcus or their relationship. The work was allowed to exist on its own terms. But in private correspondence, Dorothy had written Jamal a note that he kept on his desk. Sometimes love is the catalyst for art. Sometimes the person who sees you changes everything. Don't ever feel guilty for the relationship that helped you find yourself. The best art comes from people who are brave enough to live fully. 2 years after they met, Marcus and Jamal took a trip to Paris. It was a gift from Marcus. He wanted to show Jamal the museums and galleries, the places where art history was literally visible on the walls. They spent hours in the Musée de Montmartre, in the Picasso Museum, in smaller galleries tucked away in the Marais. One evening, they were walking along the Seine just after sunset, the light turning the water into molten gold. "I want to ask you something," Marcus said, and there was a particular quality to his voice that made Jamal's heart rate spike. Marcus pulled out a ring, nothing fancy, just a simple band of white gold with a small diamond. "I know I said I wasn't going to propose yet, but I'm old and impatient and I don't want to waste any more time. Jamal, will you marry me?" Jamal laughed and cried simultaneously. Yes, obviously yes. Marcus slipped the ring on his finger and then they stood together, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as darkness fell. Jamal felt like he was in a dream. The kind of moment that seemed too perfect to be real, and yet it was real. This man, this love, this life, all of it was real and solid and his. "I have a confession," Jamal said that night back in their hotel room. "When I first saw you in the gallery, I thought you were going to try to sleep with me. I thought you were going to be another older man trying to take advantage." "I know," Marcus said. "I could see the wariness in your eyes. I'm glad I wasn't that man." "How did you know not to be?" Marcus considered this. "Because I was afraid too. I was afraid that if I pushed too hard, if I made my attraction obvious too quickly, I would lose you. And the thought of losing you before I'd even really met you was unbearable, so I chose to build something real instead of taking a shortcut." "That's very wise, old man. I have my moments." They made love that night with a tenderness that had only deepened over time. What had started as passionate and intense had evolved into something more sustaining, more real. They knew each other's bodies now, knew how to touch each other, knew the particular vulnerabilities and strengths. Sex between them was an ongoing conversation, an affirmation of the commitment they'd made. The wedding was held 2 years later on a beautiful spring day. They got married in the gallery with paintings as witnesses. The ceremony was small but meaningful, close friends, family, and the people who had been important in their journey together. Jamal's parents came and his mother cried. His father, standing beside him in the gallery as Jamal waited to get married, took his hand. "I'm proud of you," his father said. "I'm proud of who you are and what you've built, and I'm glad it's with someone who loves you the way Marcus does." When Marcus walked down the aisle, there was no formal procession, just the two of them finding each other. Jamal's breath caught. Marcus was wearing a tailored suit in a soft gray, and he was smiling like he couldn't quite believe this was happening. They'd written their own vows and they read them facing each other, their words raw and honest and full of love. Marcus spoke about how he thought his life was complete before Jamal, that he'd made peace with the idea that he would walk the rest of his journey alone. "But then you walked into my gallery, and you saw me the way an artist sees light. You found me and illuminated all the dark places I didn't even know existed. You changed my life, you saved my life, and I'm going to spend the rest of it loving you with everything I have." Jamal spoke about loneliness and displacement, about looking for home and finally finding it. I came to this city thinking I needed to find a place for my art, but what I found was a place for myself. I found someone who believed in me before I believed in myself, who challenged me to be better, who loved me completely and without reservation. I found you, Marcus, and you are home." There wasn't a dry eye in the gallery. 5 years after they met, Jamal's work was displayed in major museums. He'd been featured in national publications, interviewed for podcasts, invited to speak at universities across the country. He'd become exactly the artist he'd always wanted to be, and he'd done it while building a life with someone he loved. Marcus, now in his early 70s, had officially stepped back from day-to-day management of the gallery, though he remained deeply involved. They'd brought on a younger curator, a woman named Keisha, who had been Jamal's gallery assistant and who shared their vision for championing emerging artists. The gallery had become a destination, a place where important work was shown, where emerging artists were nurtured. And at the heart of it all was the partnership between Marcus and Jamal, a living example of how different people from different generations and backgrounds could build something beautiful together. One evening, they were in the gallery after closing, hanging a new exhibition. It was work by several emerging artists, including a young black queer woman whose paintings reminded Jamal of his own early work, full of rage and tenderness, demanding to be seen. "Do you remember when you were her?" Marcus asked, watching Jamal arrange a particularly powerful piece. "I am her," Jamal corrected. "I'm still making work about the same things, just in more sophisticated ways." "True, I remember when you were so angry all the time." "I still get angry, but I've learned to make art about something other than anger. I've learned to make art about love too." Marcus put his arm around Jamal's waist and they stood together looking at the young woman's work. After 40 years of curating, Marcus had trained his eye to recognize talent. But more than that, he'd trained his heart to recognize potential in art, in people, in the possibility of connection. "Do you ever regret it?" Jamal asked, "taking a chance on me, letting me into your life?" "Not for a second," Marcus said without hesitation. "You know what my biggest regret in life is? It's David, not because I was with him but because we didn't have enough time. We had 5 years together and then he was gone. After that I told myself I was done with romance, done with risk. I thought love was too dangerous, too painful. But meeting you taught me that the alternative, a life without love, without risk, without connection, that's the real tragedy." "I'm glad I taught you something," Jamal said with a smile. "You've taught me everything that matters. You've taught me how to be vulnerable again. You've taught me that there's a whole life waiting beyond the walls I built to protect myself. You've taught me that love doesn't get smaller or less important as you age, it just gets deeper, more real." Later that night, lying in bed, Jamal thought about the improbability of his life. 5 years ago, he was sleeping in his car, applying to residencies that rejected him, trying to make art that no one wanted to see. And then Marcus had walked into his life, or rather, he had walked into Marcus's gallery and everything had changed. Some people called it destiny, some people called it luck. Jamal had come to understand it as something else entirely. It was the intersection of readiness and opportunity, of two people being brave enough to risk something real with each other. He turned to look at Marcus sleeping beside him. Even in sleep, Marcus looked peaceful, content. This man who'd been afraid of love had become the most loving person Jamal knew. He loved openly, generously, with his whole heart. Jamal thought about the young woman in the new exhibition, the one with the angry paintings and the desperate hunger to be seen. He wanted to tell her that it would get better, that the anger would transform into something more nuanced, that she would find people who would believe in her, that love would find her in unexpected places, in unexpected forms. But he also knew that you had to live through your own story. You had to make your own mistakes, take your own risks, discover for yourself what was possible. All you could do was show up, do your work with intention and integrity, and be open to the possibility of connection. 10 years after they met, Marcus died peacefully in his sleep. He was 75. Jamal was beside him as he had been for a decade of nights. When he realized Marcus was gone, Jamal didn't cry. Instead, he lay there in the darkness, feeling the weight of what he'd lost and the gratitude of what he'd had. Marcus had been right. The time they'd had together was a gift. And yes, Jamal would have wanted more. He would have wanted decades more, would have wanted to wake up next to Marcus for the rest of his life. But he'd learned, through watching Marcus grieve David, that loss was the price of love, that the pain of missing someone was proportional to how much they'd mattered. And Marcus had mattered. More than anything else in Jamal's life, Marcus had mattered. In the weeks that followed, Jamal moved through his grief in much the way Marcus had moved through his grief over David by creating. He made a series of paintings in shades of gray and gold, exploring the feeling of loss, the way absence had texture and weight. The paintings were intimate and devastating, and when they were finally shown, critics called them among the finest work of his career. It's as if, one reviewer wrote, the artist has found a way to paint the unpaintable. He's made grief visible, he's made love visible, and in doing so, he's made us feel less alone in our own losses. The gallery continued. Jamal took it over fully, eventually bringing on partners and expanding their mission. The space became even more of a gathering place for artists and art lovers, a place where emerging work was championed and celebrated. Jamal never remarried. He had relationships, some serious, some fleeting. But none of them replicated what he'd had with Marcus, and he didn't want them to. What he'd had with Marcus was singular, a once-in-a-lifetime convergence of two people who desperately needed each other. Instead, Jamal poured his love into his art, into supporting other artists, into building the kind of legacy that Marcus had started. He became, in many ways, the mentor that Marcus had been, a person who could see potential in emerging artists, who could offer not just opportunities but genuine belief in what they were capable of. And sometimes, late at night in the gallery, Jamal would find himself in the space where he and Marcus had first kissed, remembering the feel of his hands, the particular cadence of his voice, the way he looked at art like it was the most important thing in the world. In those moments, Jamal understood something that Marcus had tried to teach him over the years, that love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms. It becomes something you carry with you, something that shapes how you see the world, something that makes you kinder and more generous with everyone you meet. Years later, when Jamal was in his 60s, a young artist came into his gallery, a queer kid of color, full of anger and talent and the kind of desperate hunger to be seen that Jamal recognized in himself at that age. Jamal watched the young man look at a painting, saw the moment of recognition, the way the art reached something inside him that had been waiting to be touched. And Jamal thought about Marcus, about the incredible gift of being truly seen, of having someone believe in you before you believed in yourself. He approached the young artist, as Marcus had approached him all those years ago, with genuine interest and an open heart. "That piece," Jamal said, "it's speaking to you, isn't it?" The young man looked surprised, then relieved, then emotional. "Yes, how did you know?" "Because I've seen that look before," Jamal said. "It's the look of someone finding themselves in art, it's the look of someone being recognized." Jamal invited the young artist to come back with his work. He offered mentorship and support and genuine belief. And as he did, he felt Marcus beside him, approval in the invisible presence, the sense that he was continuing the work that Marcus had started. Love, Jamal had learned, wasn't just about romance. It was about seeing people. It was about recognizing potential and nurturing it. It was about leaving the world slightly better than you found it, about building something beautiful that outlasted you. Marcus had given him all of that, and now Jamal could pass it on. The arc of his life, from homeless artist to celebrated creator, from lonely and desperate to beloved and secure, from someone who thought love was impossible to someone who understood that love was the most real thing that existed, all of it traced back to one man who'd had the courage to reach across the distance between them. Some people called it destiny. Jamal understood it as grace, the unexpected gift of connection, the miracle of being seen, the redemptive power of love. And he was grateful every single day for the moment when he'd walked into a gallery and found, without knowing he was looking for it, the love of his life.